Okay, Parshas by B'Shalach. Vahi B'Shalach Paro Sa'om. And when Paro sent out the people, Lo Nochav Elokim Derech Eretz Pelishtim. Hashem did not lead them along the Philistine highway or the Philistine route, Kikorafu, because it was close. Ki Omer Elokim Pen Yinochim Ha'omri Rosem Milchama. Because maybe the people will have a change of heart when they will see battle, Shav Mitzrayim, and they will return to Egypt. So Rashi says over here, what's Kikorafu? The Philistine route, it's close to Egypt. V'noach loshe bos haderech Mitzrayim. And they can easily return. You realize we had said that when the Jews borrowed the personal effects of the Egyptians, the Torah says, Moshe said to them, Dabin no bos ne'om, please speak to the people, encourage them to borrow their personal effects. Why would they not want to? Especially, it's Vayiten Hashem Escheinu on Bein Mitzrayim. Especially, miraculously, they had a special charm. And the Egyptians were eager to lend them. But yet, you have to somehow convince them and encourage them to borrow. Daber no. No, it means please speak to them. So over there, the Siforno explains, when they asked for the gold and silver, they asked to borrow. They didn't ask, give us. As a result of that, when the Egyptians realized that they weren't coming back, when they passed the 3-day limit, immediately they began pursuing them. So they knew that would be a basis for them to be pursued. Therefore, they don't want to borrow. Because they knew they'd be actually hounded and their lives would be in jeopardy as a result of this. Nevertheless, they borrowed. Now, when it became obvious they're not coming back, as we'll discuss in a moment, because Paro sent agents with them, that once they pass the 3-day limit, if they go past that, come back and report immediately, and then I will begin pursuing them. So this is what's happening right now. So Hashem understanding that if they're in a position that they understand they're going to be pursued, and these are their masters pursuing them, and their slaves, all the inadequacies, all the fears, due to their experience of the past with these people, immediately come back and haunt them. What do? The easiest thing is to go back. So Hashem doesn't want them to go back. So he takes them a circuitous route, not the normal route, the Philistine route, which is close to Egypt, because when they're going to be confronted with war, they're coming back. And therefore Hashem takes them the circuitous route, that even when they're confronted, it's too complicated to come back. This is the understanding. So the way we're explaining now, the Milchama is the Egyptians. Rashi's Berosa Milchama, Go Mechemes Vayir Amaleki Vaknani. We talk about not the Egyptians. Rashi is citing Chazal. They'll be confronted with the war Amalek. When is that? That's after Kriyas Yamsuf. Could you imagine? After Kriyas Yamsuf, where we say, what the lowly maidservant saw at the sea, Yechezkel didn't see. After having that level of clarity, when Amalek will attack them, they're going back. When ultimately Melech Arod Kanani attacked us, we would have gone back. It's only because we were so, it would have been too complicated. Therefore, we really didn't have much choice. There we had to fight the war. But otherwise, the people would have said to Yoshua, we're going back, rather than dealing with Amalek. The Medrash tells us by Amalek, when we were attacked by Amalek, they said, Hayesh Elokim b'kimbeinu imoyim. Is God with us or not? So Hashem says, if you're questioning after all you've seen, if, am I with you or not? I'm going to send a people who don't believe in God. They will attack you. That's the Mida Keneged Mida. If you're questioning Yeshel Kim and Kibenim Oyin, Amalek, who's Lo Yori Elokim, who don't fear God, they will attack you. Okay? That's what happened. So the Midrash says that Amalek has a certain level of representation. They have a level of they are the most extreme level of Esav Son of the Yaakov. So when we're attacked by Amalek, we understand the only reason is only because that we're in an unforgivable situation. If that's the case, the easiest thing would be to go back to Egypt. And when we go back to Egypt, what is this? Egypt no longer exists because we'll discuss in a moment. We're attacked by Amalek after Kriyas Yamsuf. Egypt was history, correct? So if Egypt is history, we could go back easily. All the original fears that we had about Egypt is no longer there. We're going to see in a moment that, not today, when the sea closed on the Egyptians, that was really the Go'alti. Go'alti was one of the 4 expressions of redemption. So the Sephardo says, because until the master is no longer alive, the slave is not at peace, can't sleep at night. Even though we left with glory from Egypt, that we driven out, but factually, as long as the master is alive, the slave cannot sleep. But you're a free man. You never know when he could retake you. So only once the sea closed on them and they were spit out on the seashore and we saw the remains of the Egyptians, that was Vogalti. We're finally rid of them. You understand? So when we would go back to Egypt, who are we going back to? We're not going back to our masters. We're going back to, now it's a safe haven. Compared to what we have to deal with in the desert. And it was difficult enough as we had last week. They went out to the desert, Eretz Lo Zerua. There were no provisions, an unplanted wilderness. We're willing to do that. Now we're going to be attacked by Amalek, and our masters are no longer alive. What is so-called the safe haven in their minds? The location that they're familiar with. They're familiar with Egypt. They're going back to Egypt. Therefore, lo nochem derech eretz plishtim ki korafu. Omayim shikifom derech mukam amro nidna roshan oshuv mitzraymo. Here he took in this circuitous route, and they said, "Let us point a leader and go back." If he would have taken along a straight route, where it would have been complicated to go back, definitely they would have gone back. So Hashem took them the route of the desert route, Yamsuf, and the Torah is making the point, v'chamushim. And Rashi explains, only a fifth of the Jews left Egypt. So here we're talking about the Jews who had that level of belief. The other 80% died during the days of darkness. With Hashem is concerned, this is the cream of the crop. These Jews have the level of faith, even though it's Seder Lo, they went out into the desert. Nevertheless, Hashem had to take them the circuitous route because everybody has his point of weakness. You can't push the envelope too far. Because if you put them in a position where they're going to feel threatened, even with all their level of faith and belief, they're going back. So that's what here the Torah tells us explicitly, Vachamushim. Only a fifth left. This is the fifth, 20%. Nevertheless, you have to deal with them, even within that capacity. You can't put them in a position where if they're confronted, they're going back. Chamushim, Rashi has 2 interpretations. They were actually, they had weapons. Fishe Sibon b'midbar hu goram lem she'olu chamushim. Shul hasibon derech yishel lo yimuchumoshim lehem kol ma shetzrichim. He says, if you would have taken them along the route where there were communities, they wouldn't have had to go with weapons and all that. Whatever provisions you need, you purchase there. The reason why this pasuk is informing us here, only to give us an understanding, Shlo Tomar, when we fought the battles with Amalek at Sichon, where do we have weaponry? We had weapons. The answer is because when we left Egypt, since we were going through the desert route, we had to take weapons to protect ourselves. Zoris, fully prepared. You know, it's interesting. When we went into the desert, we left Egypt. It says they took weapons. It says originally he took them, he would have taken the Philistine route, but it was Korafu. But because he took them into the desert, therefore they had to go with weapons. But the reason why he took them the desert route, not the Philistine route, because Korafu. We said already the Jews knew when we left Egypt, we knew we were going to the desert. Because that's the whole concept. It says, say the law to them. They did not prepare provisions, being food. And what does that say about Klal Yisrael? The Navi says, I will always remember the chesed of the youth. You follow me in the desert. Well, if we left Egypt, we thought we were going along the inhabited route. What's the chesed nurayich? So evidently, when we left Egypt, we already were informed the route we're taking is the desert route. Even though so, we had the faith, we went. And we took weapons. Why do we take weapons? Because you don't know what you're going to be confronted with. That's why they had to take weapons. So they knew advance for two reasons. That's the chesed nurayich. But now that we have the faith, but still we have to do what we have to prepare ourselves. Food-wise, it says, say the law Slahem. They did not prepare enough provisions food-wise. Hashem will provide. But it's interesting. Hashem will provide the food, but yet will take weapons because you never know what you're going to be confronted with. I mean, if Hashem is going to provide the food, the provisions, and that's why you weren't prepared food-wise, why did you have to take weapons? Right? Seems to be food was not a concern. We'll go, even though we have a minimum food, we're going to go. Now, why didn't they take enough food for the trip? Because it says they were suddenly rushed out of Egypt. So they didn't have time to prepare. Nevertheless, even though they didn't have time to prepare, they went into the desert despite that. Weapons, you take the weapon, you have weapons. Weapons was available. They just take and go. It's not something you need preparation. Food, you have to prepare. You have to store food. To prepare for this lengthy trip. Weapons you take. Food, they weren't prepared. That you need preparation. I'm just saying differentiating between food and the weapons. That's this, the chamushim, the other interpretation. 1/5 went out. One of every 5 went out. 4/5 died during the days of darkness. Because they what? Because they did not have the faith that they wouldn't want to go out. When push comes to shove, these people, when they're going to be rushed out, they're not going out of Egypt. They're not going. These people, regardless, they will have the faith. Because the ones who had the faith, Hashem spared, the others were not spared. Why? Because no Jew remains in Egypt. The objective of the moment is you have to go to Kabbalah to Sinai to receive the Torah. If you're not going to Sinai, as a Jew, you don't remain alive. The value of the Jew is for the sake of Torah and for the sake of the Jewish people, God created this world. So what is your value? Your value is only receiving Torah at Sinai. If you have no interest in leaving Egypt to go to Sinai, then your life, your value has no longer any value. Therefore, 4/5 died during the days of darkness. The fifth that was agreeable to go, despite the fact is that, as we said, they were over the Avodah Zorah, they had the same backgrounds in terms of idolatry, everything doesn't make a difference. But you have the faith. So what's the obvious question? Doesn't Aviram, who were the ones who originally formed the Moshe Rabbeinu, what happened? They survived. Because we see that after Kriyas Yamsuf, they were still there. As we see when we had the man, they were not permitted to leave over from the man till the morning. Who left over from the man till morning? Dosan Aviram. Who are the ones who went out on Shabbos to see if there was man out in the field? Dosan Aviram. The story with Adas Korach, the community of Korach, the rebellion, Dosan Aviram. They led the rebellion together with Korach against Moshe. I mean, 4/5 die because they were showing, because they did not have the faith. Dosan Aviram, they were spared. You see, they survived the days of darkness. But if they were such Rishoyim, what Hashem allowed them to survive the days of darkness? Right? How do we understand it? Now, we find Dasan Abiram, they themselves, they believed. They had special pedigree because they were the sons of what? Of Reuven, who was the Bechor. The Rechaim HaKosh makes this point, but not regarding this particular point here. They themselves, when they said to Moshe Rabbeinu, when he gave them Musar, when he rebuked them, when he says, Rosh Lomasakes Reyecho, he says, who appointed you to be Sar V'Shofet? Since when did you become a minister, a judge, that you're passing judgment on us? You know, you're a young whippersnapper. Who do you think you are? He ruffled their feathers. They held, today were slaves, but they were, as we said, they were able to inform a Moshe Rabbeinu because there was a wealthy group in the slave class, and they informed the Moshe Rabbeinu. They themselves continuously believed they had certain rights, and they could do, and they had that level, and they were never reined in on. Dasan Aviram. Dasan Aviram believed that ultimately, that when they arrive in Eretz Yisrael, they're going to flex their muscle. What happened when they found out after the Meraglim that that anybody above the age of 20 is going to perish in the desert? Immediately. They had conniptions. They went crazy. I mean, here we're waiting for the moment of glory. That Moshe Rabbeinu says ultimately, and we have all this wealth of Egypt. You know, what do you do with wealth in the desert? The wealth in the desert had no value. You can have all the gold and all the silver. What's this? Korach had wealth. He was the wealthiest commoner who ever lived. Jewish commoner ever lived. What happened to his wealth? It was swallowed up by the ground, by the earth. You could have wealth, but if you're not able to put it to work, so if we arrive in Canaan, there the wealth would have value. Status has value. In the desert, what are you doing? You can't fight your way out of a paper bag in the desert. Has no value. So when Korach, when Dozavir found out they're not going into Eretz Yisrael after the sin of Meraglim, they went berserk. They said to Moshe Rabbeinu, you misled us. Here we're waiting for that moment of glory, and all of a sudden now we're not going. Therefore, they were so enraged, they supported Korach to the nth degree. They were the main spokesman when it came to the Adas Korach who rebelled against Moshe Rabbeinu. So the whole idea was, who perished? The ones who weren't interested in leaving. They weren't interested in leaving. Why were they interested in leaving? Because they want the Kabbalah Satorah. They were interested in leaving because ultimately that's the glory. Their glory is going to be restored. That's why they left. But nobody had that motive other than having faith. It's the other ones who left. The fifth, Zachati lo ches b'chrayach. Lechtach achrei b'mi beretz lo zerua. Does that Viram? We're willing to take the risk for the sake of our glory. The Chofetz Chaim makes it a point that people invest their lives with a fraction of percent that you're going to succeed, but people are willing to take a chance. But when it comes to do a mitzvah, because we don't see the immediate reward, it's not worth our while. In the material sense, people are willing to make a trip, even though the possibility, the outlay for the trip is maybe more than the profit. Maybe it's to develop relationships, and ultimately may turn out to be nothing, but you're willing to take a chance. That's the ego of a person, or the idealism of a person, willing to take a chance. When it comes to spirituality, that's not the case. So it's not because they believed that Hashem will provide. It's we're willing to believe because ultimately they have an ulterior motive. Their ulterior motive was their glory. That was Nasan Avira. Vayikach Moshe's Atzmus Yosef Imo. Moshe took the bones of Yosef with him. He had adjured the Bnei Yisrael saying, Hokod Yifkod Elokim Eschem. Hashem will remember you. Those were the code words. And you will take my bones mizeh itchem. He says itchem. Now let's take a look in Rashi. Hashmei Hishbiyam she'ashbilu b'neim. He adjured them that they should adjure their children. Why did he adjure his children to take them out of Egypt immediately? Yaakov, Omer Yosef, Ani Shalit, Hayisim Mitzrayim, Sipik Biyodi Lasos. I am the ruler of Egypt, therefore I have the ability to take my father out of Egypt. Avobonai Lo Yaricha Mitzrayim Lasos. But my children, the Egyptians, will not allow my remains to be taken. That when they'll be redeemed, they should take him out of Egypt. Because his children weren't able to do it as soon as he passed away. What's the itchem? Le'echov hishbia kain. Labadu shafatzomos kol hashrotim helu imoim shnem itchem. We see that not only did his remains were taken from Egypt, even the remains of all the shrotim. Therefore, I'm adjuring you to take my remains with you. So there's Navi's question. I mean, just as every Shevet, every tribe, its descendants took the remains of the founder of the tribe, Yosef had Menashe and Ephraim. What do you have to adjure all the others that to make sure to take his remains with them? Menashe and Ephraim. He has two sons, right? Let them take them. Two tribes. They'll guarantee that his remains should be taken out. But yet he put this responsibility on Klal Yisrael. Why? And this was a prerequisite to what? For the Gula. They couldn't leave Egypt unless the Atzmus Yosef went with them. So we want to discuss something. We find that Yaakov sends Yosef to Shechem to find out how the flocks are faring, how his brothers are faring, right? That's what he sent him. And he comes and he's wandering in the field and he meets a person. Ish. Who's the Ish? Gabriel. And he's looking for, he says, what are you looking for? He says, I'm looking for my brothers. So Gabriel said to him, Nosu mizer, and they went to Dosan. They traveled mizer. Nosu mizer v'holchu dosam. The Torah could have said nosu v'holchu dosam. They traveled and they went to dosam. They're no longer, what's nosu mizer? So the Mefarshim explain that if you think for a moment that Zeh is Gematria is Yud Beis, that's the miracle of Yud Beis, 12. If you think the 12 is intact, they want nothing to do with you. The 12 is broken. The profile of Klal Yisrael is 12. Because of what's going on between you and your brothers, they've written you off. They want nothing to do with you. Nosum Zeh. They extracted themselves from the Zeh. Okay? But you realize Klal Yisrael is 12. We find that what? That Yosef himself, as Al always brings out up the Rabbeinu Bachya, he never forgave his brothers. He never said the word Amochel you. And that's why ultimately we had the Asar Ru'ah Malchus, the 10 martyrs, to atone for that sin of what? Of the selling of Yosef. So he says the only time we're going to be back in that whole state is Valisim Esatzmosim Mizeh Itchem. When you go and restore the Zeh, and how will you restore the Zeh? By taking my remains out of Egypt. Because when we leave Egypt, we're going for Kabbalah Satorah. When we stand at Sinai, everything has to be intact as it originally was meant to be. The 12 tribes are united. So how are you going to demonstrate that unification? It's not enough for my children to take me out of Egypt. All the Jews have to be concerned that my remains are taken out. And if you're going to be concerned that as you're concerned about your own, you can be concerned about me, that's a restoration of the Zeh. That's Halisem es atzmosai mizeh etchem. The Zeh will be restored. And that's what it says. What in what context did he adjure them? Halisem es atzmosai mizeh etchem. That's the Zeh is restored now. So, wait 1 second. So the Sefarno asks, but factually we'll discuss in a moment, who took out the remains of Yosef? Moshe Rabbeinu. Who's Moshe Rabbeinu? Moshe Rabbeinu represents Klal Yisrael. And because he represents Klal Yisrael, he's the equivalent of the Klal Yisrael taking him out. Therefore, that's why this is a restoration of the Zeh, because that is a fulfillment of that oath that they're all going to take him out, because Moshe's a representative of every one of the Shvatim. Besides Moshe Rabbeinu being Shokol connected Yisrael, he himself is the equivalent of Klal Yisrael.
Rabbi, I think wasn't the
For this pasuk in Mishlei, it says, "Chacham Lev Yikach Mitzvos." Who's the Chacham Lev? The one who has the wisdom of the heart. That's Moshe Rabbeinu. Why? Because what were all the other Jews doing at this time? When Moshe was looking for the remains of Yosef, they were borrowing the gold and silver. And what was Moshe doing? He was trying to locate the remains of Yosef, because he understood with all what's going on, you could borrow from today to forever, all the gold, silver. We can't leave Egypt unless we have Yosef's remains. So why was Moshe looking for it? Nobody else was concerned. Moshe was the only one concerned about this issue. Even Aaron was not concerned. Everybody was borrowing because that was the mitzvah, borrow gold and silver. Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't borrowing. And that's the reason why the Gemara tells us Moshe Rabbeinu did not have any wealth. Because when everybody was borrowing gold and silver, Moshe was looking for the remains of Yosef. Therefore, Moshe left Egypt without any wealth. The Gemara tells us in the Dharma, how did Moshe become wealthy? From the carvings of the luchos, which were made of sapphire, Hashem had gifted that to him. It had nothing to do with when he left Egypt. So the question is, why did anybody else, if that was a prerequisite, say maybe the populace didn't know this, but the leadership, Aaron, knew this. Yoshua knew this. Khalid ben Yefun knew this. They all knew this. Unless you have the Atzmos Yosef, we're not leaving. But the only one who actually was concerned is Moshe Rabbeinu. And therefore Moshe Rabbeinu is called Chacham Lev Yikach Mitzvos. Because he had Chochmas HaLev, he had wisdom of the heart. He was sensitive to this, and therefore he focused on this. Okay? Now, you have 600,000 Jews above the age of 20. Among them are very responsible people. Aaron, his children, other people, the Zikneom, the elders of the people. Could you imagine? And the Atzvos Yosef have to be taken. So you'd say, and now we have a mitzvah to borrow gold and silver. Because to fulfill the promise to the tzaddik, also tzaddik, that when we leave, we have to leave b'rechush gadol. That's what we have to do. So we're doing that mitzvah. So if that's the case, why was Moshe the only one? So the answer is, because when it comes to certain things, you say, how's it possible nobody's going to take the remains of Yosef? How's it possible? 600,000 men above the age. You mean among 600,000 men, and those less, you mean nobody's going to address that need? Somebody will take care of it. But where does everybody go? We go for the gold and silver. Moshe Rabbeinu's Chacham Leiv. Ezel Chocham Haros Hanoled. I always say, what is the difference? It doesn't say Ezel Chocham Hamavinis Hanolad. He's Roas Hanolad. If you have Chochmas Halev at that special level, as they say, seeing is believing. It's a reality. How's it possible that nobody should take the reins of Yosef? It's not understandable. You know, it may not be understandable. It's improbable, but you never know. There's always a chance, even an infinitesimal chance. It may not happen. Moshe was the Chacham Lev. He was Roes Anoda. He saw the absolute clarity. And because he had that level of clarity, that's the reason he says, you know something, I'm going for the Atzmos Yosef. I don't take any chances. Everybody else says it's a chance. It's 1,000,000 to 1. It's not going to happen. Is it possible it's not going to happen? It's going to happen. Therefore, they go for the gold and silver. Moshe Rabbeinu says, because he had Chacham Lev, therefore he went, he was Rosh Hanola. The reality is, if we don't have it, we don't leave, I'm going for the Atzmos Yosef. Now, it's interesting. If not for Chazal, I would have said differently. I would have said, we find that Moshe Rabbeinu did not participate in the building of the Mishkan. Did not. The Nesiim, only the last moment did they get involved. And they gave the Avnei Shor, Avnei Miluim. They gave the precious stones for the Choshen. And why did they wait for the last moment? And they're reprimanded for this. Because the word Nesiim, when it's written deleted to indicate that it was because of the Atzlus. They were laid back because they said, after the Jews do what they have to do, whatever's lacking, we'll fill in the last. We'll come at the end and we'll give whatever is needed. What happened? They didn't realize they were nearly left out. Because they said, let the Jews do what they do, and we'll what? We'll fill in what's lacking. So Chazal tell us, because of their atzlus, their laid backness, that's the reason why they delayed. And therefore, they're reprimanded for this. Moshe Rabbeinu did not participate in the building in the Mishkan. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe, why did you not participate in the building in the Mishkan? It's very important. So he says, because if I would participate, I may deny a Jew the opportunity of participating. So therefore, let them do what they have to do. And whatever they're lacking, I'll fill in the gap. Literal verbatim what the Nesiim said. And what happened? Moshe Rabbeinu was left out. Moshe Rabbeinu did not participate in the building of the Mishkan. And he was down because of it. He felt he was disappointed. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to him, Shelchom Gedol Mishalem. Your involvement is greater than theirs. They may have built a Mishkan, but HaKomasai Mishkan, but raising the Mishkan, yeah, that's what you're going to do. So my question was, we asked in the past, Moshe Rabbeinu's words are verbatim with the Nesiim. The princes, let them do what they have to do, I'll fill in the gap. And Moshe Rabbeinu said the same thing, and factually, he couldn't even fill in the gap. They left him out. But they're reprimanded. Moshe Rabbeinu is praised for this. Why? What is this, a double standard? So we explained was, anybody who's given this kind of opportunity to do a mitzvah, it's impossible. How do you make this kind of calculation? Let them do, and I'll come at the end. Not possible. Why? Because if a person has even the slightest degree of ego, self-interest, there's no way to make this calculation. The answer is you only have that blind spot only because the ego causes you that. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you want that glory. You want the glory at the end of the day. Moshe Rabbeinu was honored b'kol adam. Moshe Rabbeinu, there was no such thing as him. There was no he. His whole essence was only Kavod Shemayim, was only God's glory. So when he said, let them do, that Klal Yisrael should have the schus, the merit, that they should be the ones to bring God's glory. And I'm not going to deny anybody that opportunity. And it cannot be attributed to himself. Because Moshe wants that. Because he doesn't have an appreciation. No, Moshe Rabbeinu has that clarity. Because he's honored b'kol adam. Because since he's honored b'kol adam, he doesn't have that blind spot that he doesn't see it clear enough. So when he said it, it was only for Kavod Shemayim, that every Jew should participate. That's what we said in the past. So what I would say like this, why did Moshe go after Atzmos Yosef? Everything went, there's a mitzvah, take gold, silver. And the Gemara tells us no Jew took less than 10 pack animals laden with gold and silver. That's the reason why the donkey, we have pigeon pentachamor. Although it's not a kosher species, the donkey has to be redeemed. Right? There's a mitzvah, pigeon pentachamor. But why did they go for the gold, silver? You know what the answer? It's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah. Moshe Rabbeinu, he has no interest in gold or silver. He has interest in one thing, Kavod Shemayim. If we don't leave Egypt, you understand, what's the value of anything? The objective is Kabbalah Satorah. So what does everything hinge on? It hinges on Yosef's remains have to be taken out. If that's the case, so what would you attribute Moshe's clarity to? He's on to be b'kol adam. Because he has no interest in gold, he has no interest in silver, he has no interest in anything. He has one interest, Kavod Shemayim. Because he has interest in Kavod Shemayim, therefore that's why he took out the remains. But Shlomo Melech Mishlei doesn't say that. He said because he was Chacham Lev. Because Chacham Lev yikach mitzvos. Because he had wisdom of the heart and he had that level of clarity. That's the reason why. Not because he was on of b'kol adam. That's not the reason. That's what I would have said if not for Shlomo saying Chacham Lev yikach mitzvos. So the question is, why do we attribute it to his anivos? Why are we attributing it to Chacham Lev yikach mitzvos? That's why he had the clarity rather than a Chacham Lev. It's late. We'll give the answer tomorrow.
In Rabbi, it's simple. There is clearly a correlation between. It's like a stage process. Someone who is Adam b'kol Adam is going to be tremendously sensitive to being Chacham Lev.
We'll talk about it tomorrow.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Okay, we left off Dalid on page 118. We didn't do the Mishnah Berurah. We had said there's a principle, anything which is muktzah at the entry point of Shabbos, even if you had in mind and you were aware that the candle's, let's say, a 3-4 hour candle, if it goes out, it's still muktzah. Because we have a principle, anything which is muktzah at the entry point of Shabbos, although ultimately the fire is going out, but since when Shabbos began, the oil, the receptacle, everything was a basis for the flame. Therefore, although ultimately it's no longer going to be the basis for it, it retains that status of basis. Right? That's what we've been learning till now. What about if a person initially says explicitly, I only want this table to accommodate the candlesticks only as long as they're burning. After they stop burning, I want them to be removed. And your housekeeper removes it from the table. Okay? Or you remove it, because it's no longer a basis. Are you permitted to remove it? So we said no. Once it's a basis, it's a basis. Okay? The Mechaber says there's an opinion that says no differently. That as long as you have in mind that it should only be up to a certain point, beyond that point, it's no longer a basis. It's only if you had in mind it should serve as a basis for the muktzah, whole Shabbos. But initially you had in mind not this way. Once that time expires, it's no longer a basis. But the Mechaber says, but we don't follow that opinion. We don't follow that opinion. We follow the opinion. If it's a buses at the entry point, it remains the buses for whole Shabbos. That's the Mechaber. The Ramos said, okay, let's see. Excuse me, Mechaber. If the Mechaber says, if he had in mind, it should only be a buses, only as long as it burns, but once it goes out, Mechaber says you're permitted the other way. The Mechaber says you're permitted. It's no longer buses. The Ramos says, but he says, no, a Tanai does not help. And the Midag Ashkenaz is not this way. V'dinat Tanai, ayin kam sim tov reish lamed ches. V'nogin l'tadlo einu Yehudi. However, the Midag is that although we normally say Amir Lakum Shvus, you're not permitted to tell a non-Jew to engage in something you're not permitted to engage in. But regarding Amir Lakum, where you're doing it through this intermediary, we rely on this lenient opinion. Because that's the minhag. Even Ashkenaz that were machmir, that we ourselves don't, but regarding Amir Lakum, we rely on this opinion. It's as if you actually, even the minhags we don't, and therefore it's meant to be their whole Shabbos. No, the minhag is that if you have a non-Jew to remove it, we don't want it to be the bosses. We don't want it to be a basis for it. Therefore, once the non-Jew takes it off, the tape, you're permitted to tell him. You're permitted to tell the non-Jew, it's not a Mir Lakum Shvus. That's the Ramah. That's as far as we got.
Rabbi,
According to the Mechaber, very lenient. The candlesticks go out, the fight goes out, you yourself could pick up the candlesticks, remove it from the table. You don't have to ask the housekeeper to do it. Of course, you're aware the fires can go after so many hours. Once it goes out, you remove it. Ashkenaz, you're not permitted to remove it. But to tell the housekeeper to remove it, you could tell. But the table, if it's on the table remains a shvus, a bosses, even according to Ashkenaz. Because the table also served the candelabra. Okay? So if you want to move the table, you tell your housekeeper you want to move the table. You're not permitted to move the table yourself. Because the table is no less than a bosses than the candelabra itself.
but only if you make it tonight, correct? Is that what we're
Because
saying?
even if you don't make it tonight,
Even if you don't.
don't. Since it's the minig is we do it through a non-Jew, it's as if you said it. Even if you make it tonight for you to do personally, we don't rely on that. But in regard to Amir Lakum, we do rely on that. Because you're not engaging directly in the buses yourself. So we have this certain leniency. But if you're Svardi, you can pick up the candlestick yourself. Once it goes out, then remove it. And put it on, take it off the table. Okay?
Rabbi, you're still recording, by the way. I don't know if you knew that.